welcome to the Meet the Editors session. It's nice to see you here. My name is Richard Eglese, and I'm Chair of the OR60 Publications Committee. And I'm very pleased to say that we do have some editors for you to meet who are ranged up in front of you here. Let me introduce them briefly because we're hoping that most of the time we can use to respond to questions and that people who come to this session would like to raise. As being pointed out in the abstract for this, we did list the editors in the order of the age of their journals, so that's the reason for the order that we have here. It is not anything to do with the ages of the editors. So we start with the most well-established of our journals, which is the Journal of the Operational Research Society, and Tom Archibald is representing that journal. European Journal of Information Systems is next, and Ågerfalk is representing the three editors there. Knowledge Management, Research and Practice. It was due to be Giovanni Schiuma who was on the panel, but unfortunately he's had to disappear. But Tom Jackson from Loughborough University, who is one of our newest editors, has agreed to take his place, which is great. Journal of Simulation, we have Currie from Southampton. Health Systems, we have Brailsford, also from Southampton. And then our newest journal, which some of you may not have seen yet, but Volume 1, Issue 1 looks like this, and you can see it on the Taylor and Francis stand and have a look at it. It's a Journal of Business Analytics, and because it's our new journal that we're launching, then we have the two editors-in-chief, Dursendellen and Sudaram, here on the panel. So you may want to ask questions about that new journal as well. Now, I don't want us to spend too long in introductions, but I did ask each of the editors if they'd be prepared to say just one thing about their journal that they would like the audience to know about. So I hope that's still okay. And if we can go through in that same order, Tom, can I ask you to say something about Jaws?
Yeah, I can do that. I mean, the one thing I thought I would like to emphasise with Jaws is the fact it's so highly regarded internationally. That's something that perhaps coming from the UK we tend to overlook because we think of it as the Journal of the Operational Research Society, our research society, which of course it is, but it's also a highly regarded international journal, not least because it's the oldest journal in the area, and you can see that from the authors that are publishing in the journal. I did a search this morning, and over the last few years there's been authors from over 60 countries writing articles that have appeared in the journal. And also in terms of the authors who are citing the work in the journal, again, looking at the citation analysis, there are over 90 countries represented by authors who have cited the journal in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's a highly regarded international journal, and we really should not forget that.
Excellent. You're next for Aegis.
Right, yeah, so Aegis is the Information Systems Journal. I think it's important to understand that we're an ORS journal, but we're also part of another community, I guess, the Association for Information Systems, and Aegis is included in what is called the AIS Senior Scholars Basket of 8, which is a sort of quality mark, I suppose, that it's one of the core journals in the IS field internationally. So I think that's good to know.
Yep, fine, thank you. let's move on to knowledge management, research and practice. Tom.
So as a true academic, I've got 2 points rather than 1 point. They're both very brief. One, we would like to see more data from industry, more case studies going into the journal. So we appeal for more papers around that. And 2, we're always looking for new reviewers, especially from industry. So if you fancy doing a bit of reviewing, we'd like to hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much. Christine, you're next for the Journal of Simulation.
Okay, so the title is fairly self-explanatory about what we publish, but to emphasise, we publish practice and theoretical contributions to simulation. So again, just like it's been said, we like some case studies from practical applications of simulation as well as academic research in there. And our impact factor has gone up again this year, so we're quite relatively highly cited journal as well.
Thank you, Christine. And Sally, on health systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I'd like to say about our journal is to emphasise its breadth. It spans both operational research and information systems, and our editorial structure reflects that. We've got 4 editors-in-chief, 2 basically IS, 2 basically OR, and about 15 or 16 area editors that span a really broad range of topics. So as long as it's to do with us, broadly speaking, a systems approach in healthcare, we're really open to any kind of article, a number of article types. Totally echo that we'd love to see more case studies, and particularly in an applied area like healthcare. I think that would really be, I think people feel nervous about submitting case studies, but we do have a specific article type, so I'd just like to encourage anyone that has one, please, to submit one.
Okay, thank you, Sally. So finally, Journal of Business Analytics. Is it going to be Derson or Sudan first? Please.
So hi, this is a new journal we've just introduced, as Richard said, and our entire focus is on business analytics, starting from identifying an interesting research problem, collecting real data, not simulated data or like toy data sets, and developing new methods that combine machine learning, statistics, probably network science, and or econometrics, and evaluating and validating the methodology. So that's kind of our focus for this year.
I'll give you an opportunity as well.
Thank you, Michael. So far, business analytics research went to a lot of other journals where you had to fit it into a specific format of that journal. Although it was business analytics, you had to reform it, reshape it, so that it would be manageable, reviewable, and acceptable. Now that there is a dedicated hacks for business analytics research, right? Real data, real problem, real results, kind of combined together on a good paper can be submitted to the Journal of Business Analytics, which covers descriptive, predictive, prescriptive, the whole spectrum of analytics research as it applies to business. So we're very excited. I think there's a great potential for the journal to become the outlet for business analytics research in the near future. So we expect you all who does research in business analytics to submit your best work to the journal so that we can expeditiously get it reviewed and published in the journal.
Great, thank you, Derson. So thank you very much for cooperating in giving very nice and brief introductions to your journals, which is, I think, just right. So that does leave the floor open now for people who would like to ask questions of the panel as a whole, or perhaps more particularly towards particular editors of journals. It's over to you. Who would like to ask a question? Okay, yeah? Can people hear all right, or do we need to use the mic here?
Use the mic.
Yeah. I think that should be on.
Thank you very much for this. So first of all, when I saw the business analytics, already at the moment we are working on journal for energy analytics, which I'm heading, but I want to ask the gentleman in business analytics, because I have a possible idea which I don't know if it's appropriate in that journal. It's not part of my research, but it's my personal project, because after my PhD, I'm a PhD student at Stanford University, and I intend to engage in full-scale applying the outcome of my research in businesses. The primary aim of what I intend to do is to minimize high cost of living by, in terms of food products. So I'm looking into using renewable energy for agro-processing, so we can have a reduced cost of food products. So I'll give you, cooking oil is the first target. So currently, yes, all processing, agro-processing equipment are used, dependent on fossil fuel generation. But because I'm an energy person, I want to use renewable energy to process agricultural products. And because I'm using renewable energy, my operations cost is fixed, not variable or increased in terms of fossil fuel sources, to have a reduced cost of product along the line, reducing high cost of living, and also in the transport sector, apart from agriculture, like national express, for example, is the case study which I will look at. It's like not setting up a separate business that we operate on electric buses, but actually buying up national express, not to have a separate infrastructure, converting their coach stations to having capability to generate solar and wind in order to recharge those EV buses that will be coming to each coach station. So anytime a bus parks, it recharges and has enough energy to go to the next destination. This will impact on the cost of transport, which will be fixed. So generally, high cost of living, we can now say our transportation cost has been fixed, our food cost has been fixed, so we can have a reduced living standard. So is this something that is appropriate or compatible with this area of business? Thank you.
If I understood it correctly, and Sudha, please correct me if I'm off track here. You described a multi-objective, multi-criteria optimization type of problem situation where you mentioned the food-related aspects as well as the energy. So it all depends upon where your main contribution is. If your contribution is to the business outcomes, making things better, then it's suitable as long as you're using real-world data, solving a real or described as a real business problem and finding real solutions to it. So if your contribution is algorithmic, right? How do you formulate this optimization complex situation, maybe heuristic to solve it? Then maybe some other journal might be all the way to the other side more appropriate. But if it's a business problem you're solving using real data, finding real solutions, and it's packaged together, then it would be perfectly fine for
we
you.
assume that currently the price of cooking oil is £8 per litre. So if I manufacture my using renewable energy and put my price at £5 per litre, it's not a business case.
It depends how you frame it, right?
Yes, of course.
So from the business standpoint, if you're a food company, how can I produce more with less cost and be more effective and efficient? And then if you frame it as such, then it's a business analytics problem. If you're framing it as such that, so it all depends upon where the contribution, the main contribution, main focal point is.
Yes, definitely, the mathematical formulation will include constraints from renewable generation in terms of sizing to meet the capacity of the equipment, because what we're looking at is actually converting processing equipment to renewable based with the sole aim of having a reduced cost of production, which will impact on the final price of the product. you categorize this in this journal as a business?
I personally would, because it's going to end up saving money, right? Making more with less from the standpoint of energy. So again, it all depends upon how you package and how you focus your paper.
Okay, can we...
potential, but we can talk about more.
Yeah. Can we just broaden it out a little bit? And I don't know if any of the other editors want to say anything about somebody who's concerned about whether their potential paper is suitable for your journal. Do you just have to sort of read up on what's available, or is it possible to contact you to ask questions about suitability of types of paper? Anyone want to address that?
I would be more than happy to comment on your short couple of paragraphs, maybe a single paragraph idea of whether or not the paper is suitable to our journal. I would be more than happy to comment on that. I think that would be a great idea to save you time and us to get the paper that we can actually send out to reviewers. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's true in general for probably all the journals, and it's a good thing to contact. Maybe try to make a meeting at a conference or whatever with a journal editor that you think might be interested in your work, but try to be concrete, read up about the journal beforehand, and have a clear idea whether this. I mean, you obviously have that, but sometimes you people don't have that, and so there's no. It's not a good idea to set up a meeting if you don't have.
Yeah. So.
I'd just like to say, I get emails relatively frequently with people either sending me an abstract or just their idea or the whole paper saying, is this suitable for your journal? And I'd much rather that, because sometimes I can give them a really quick answer, yes or no. Sometimes it takes a bit of thought, but I think any journal editor would be happy at least to give you a feel for whether it was suitable. And also we pass papers between ourselves. So, if something comes in, say to George, that's not, that's related to health, we have in the past had papers that have come from one to the other.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should move on. So we have another question here. Let me pass you the mic.
Right, thanks very much. There's quite an impressive array of journals being described here, but moving forward in time, my question to several of you is, what do you see as the evolving kind of overlaps between these journals, particularly with the appearance of the Journal of Business Analytics, and how that might interact on the one hand with JAWS, on the other hand with the European Journal of Information Systems, and even with the Journal of Simulation? Mm-hmm. So that's my question, because it seems intriguing how the field is developing and it's sort of reflected in the nature of the journals.
Yep, no. Good question. Who would like to field that first? Tom.
I go first, actually. I think it's something that, as long as the OR Society has been developing new journal titles, there's always been discussion about to what extent is there overlap between the journals. And this is, I think, always been true. And I think one of the arguments is that a larger portfolio of journals is going to, broaden the reach of the Society's publications and actually be good for all the publications. So the new Journal of Business Analytics is maybe something which will speak to different communities who identify themselves with business analytics, who previously may not have thought of the research as being something that would be within an operational research sort of area. And so it might bring in more people, bring the Society journals to the attention of more people, and actually everyone can sort of benefit. And I think there'll always be sort of overlap, so health systems, simulation, Aegis, business analytics, all potentially overlap with JAWS to some extent. And then it's a question of where the authors really want to see the research. If they think the research is best served by publishing in health systems because that's the community they want to reach, then that's the choice to make. So to some extent, I think the authors then have to choose where the best place for their work actually is, bearing in mind where, who they want to talk to and who they want to sort of reach.
Can I add to that? So I agree completely that there is to some extent, these journals do overlap. Business analytics is certainly a part of information systems. It's also part of operations research. In health, you can do health analytics. That's also business analytics. But I think having one journal that covers business analytics will provide a one-stop shop for people who are specifically looking for analytics papers, whether they come from computer science, maybe economics, possibly from AI, some of these other related disciplines, and that's what we want to do. And specifically, we want to make sure we publish papers that don't just propose an algorithm, but actually do leverage large data sources, real-world data sources, as opposed to simulating the data, and they actually solve a real-world problem. So that's kind of the focus of this journal. That's where machine learning comes in, and a combination of machine learning, statistics, and network science sort of come together in solving a problem and then evaluating the solution with the methodological contribution. So that's the niche that we're hoping to target with this Journal of Business Analytics.
Did you want to follow up?
Yes, just to add, they're all really good comments, the way that it describes where the Journal of Business Analytics fits in. A lot of the overlap, the way that I see it personally, is on the prescriptive side, on the more optimization, simulation, close to the best decision-making portion of analytics, whereas business analytics actually covers the descriptive side. So there's data warehousing, there's data visualization as they apply to real-world business problems. Probably the most significant differentiation is in the middle tier, the predictive analytics. I don't think any of our journals, our side, it covers the machine learning, the data mining, the predictive analytics, right? Text mining, sentiment, kind of aspects into their coverage. And I also agree with Tom that this new journal will actually expand the pie, so each slice is going to be larger. So as opposed to taking from each other, I think there's going to be a lot more coverage, and the pie itself is getting larger, as you said. Already know the business analytics is becoming more and more popular. So it will, I think, help collectively the all journals to receive more submissions and leverage a broader area of coverage.
So, okay, yep. So we can move on. We have a question up here.
So I think it follows on from that question. Thinking about scope, but now thinking perhaps outside the scope, the usual scope of OR traditionally. Whether you as editors would like to focus more, say, so you're presenting a more direct message to the like readership, whether you'd like to draw in new areas that might come on the other journals that might linking with OR, talk about machine learning there, statistics. I mean, that could be one reaction could say, no, this isn't really in scope, but, this isn't really towards readership. Another reaction might be actually, let's bring it in, let's be inclusive, because that's a history of OR really. I'm just wondering if you are.
I think with
I mean, in health systems, we do have areas which I think are definitely not traditionally OR. So, health services research would be one, and I guess we are looking for an element of modelling. So I think one of the issues with our journal title is that people think it's just a journal about health systems, and we get a lot of submissions which are nothing to do with the systems approach. But we do have areas which the intention is to open up the readership to people from outside disciplines, and certainly in healthcare management, and I think the health economics and these kind of areas, they obviously have some kind of synergy with OR, but the aim was that that we wanted to appeal to kind of show people that OR methods could be used in broader areas. So, I mean, I don't know whether health systems is kind of unique in that respect, but it was certainly one of our intentions when the journal was set up.
I mean, I was just going to say that I think for George, we consider it as being a general operational research journal and publishing work which encapsulates the breadth of operational research, and in a way it's up to the community then to define what operational research actually means. And at the beginning of this year, which coincided with Taylor and Francis taking over the publication of the journal, we did a review of the keyword list for the journal and actually added, unfortunately I can't see off the top of my head some of the words we added, but it would have been interesting to reflect on those. But we added a number of keywords based on the keywords that people have been using in recent years in the journal, and then also looking at other operational research journals and seeing what keywords were appearing there, which maybe we hadn't included in our list previously, and to try to make the keyword list reflect more what the operational research community, at least through the academic journals, seemed to be saying was operational research. So that's something that's been done, and I think an ongoing process, just keeping that list up current and sort of up to date.
Okay. Yes, let's take another question.
Without the microphone. See if you can hear me okay down there. Mm-hmm. Okay. My question is, as much more of a practitioner than an academic, is the challenge of a literature review. My assumption is that for any of your journals, you would need that to be pretty well covered. Is that a fair assumption? And if so, do you have any sort of practical tips for people who are not, kind of necessarily have the time or the ability to review journals about how they would go about doing that?
Well, I mean, if I can talk about case studies, I certainly wouldn't expect to see a literature section in a case study. I would expect to see that, that you understood the modelling approach that you'd used, but I would be looking for a description of the setting and the problem and how you tackled it, and how useful the model was, and what the insights you got, and those kind of practical things. So I think it depends on, obviously, if you're writing a different kind of article, then not having access to a university library with a bibliographic search engine and the rest of it must be challenging. But I mean, I think quite a few of us have said that we'd love to have more case studies, and case studies from practice in particular. So it's just, I'm sure actually finding the time to write them must be more of a challenge than the literature. So.
Well, I think they're both challenges, but as you rightly said, I think for practitioners, a literature review can be just a daunting challenge without some academic collaboration or some other means to get there.
So if I may offer a suggestion there, I think these days we have repositories like Google Scholar, where you can actually, in one quick sweep, you can actually get a collection of articles with their abstracts, and that can help you narrow down papers that you may want to look at. And really the purpose of a literature review is not to be exhaustive, but to sort of focus on your area, to say if you're developing a new method or a new algorithm of some kind or a new model, how it's different from what's already the best of the breed. And so you really don't have to go back in history, you just have to do a comparison with what's the best, and typically you can get that by doing a Google Scholar search. I mean, that's the simplest way to start.
Is that available to anyone?
Yes, Google Scholar is available to everybody, so just go to Google and type in Google Scholar and type in your keywords, and out pop all the papers, and a lot of them have been digitized by Google, or they'll give you links to places where you can find them. And these days we have open repositories like SSRN, etc., where people actually publish the last version of the paper before it got published in a journal. So it's an easy way to find these papers. They're not behind a paywall.
The other possibility there is society membership gives you access to product called EBSCO Business Source Plus, and that allows you to search a whole bunch of newspapers, journals, academic journals, magazines, and do exactly that sort of stuff. So if you're a member, you can log on to the website and go and access that.
I am a member. I prefer Salazar, so I have to say.
We do this and then ignore it.
That's very helpful.
Yeah. And the other thing is to get an academic mate, because I'm sure that there are many academics who would only be overjoyed to have the possibility of collaborating with someone who's a practitioner who's interested in publishing. So I'm sure there'd be a lot of willing collaborators out there if you want to make contact.
Can I just one extra thing? I mean, the other thing to do is to talk to the editor, of course. If you've got an idea for a paper and something you want to put together, if you contact the editor and say, I want to do this, I don't really want to do the literature review, how much do I need to do? What's the kind of the basic minimum? Then the editor, as we've all said, we like the case study, so we'll be able to give you an indication of how much you do need to do before you can submit something. And the other thing to add, this was through conference publications in particular, is coming from the commercial world, you're not always have such a thick skin to the review process that academics grow over the years, because the review process can sometimes be brutal. But the editors can hopefully help with that to make sure you've not got the really unpleasant reviews that sometimes come back. Not unpleasant, that's the wrong word, but very critical reviews. You have to be prepared for that criticism.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on, and we have another question.
Yes, business schools and management schools sometimes have series of working papers or discussion papers. Are there any disadvantages to releasing such a paper prior to submitting to a journal?
I mean, I think, do you mean in terms of ultimately getting it published in the journal, or do you mean in general?
In general terms, are there any disadvantages to releasing a working paper prior to submitting to a journal?
I think from the point of view of a researcher, the goal is to get research out to potential users as quickly as possible. So from that point of view, publishing it on a departmental working paper series is a good way to do that. You have to be careful about the policies the journals have. I mean, I don't think any of the journals here would have any issues with it being published in a departmental website prior to submission, but I think several other journals might have questions on it, or maybe even Aegis. No. But and you know, so I think it's a good way to get research out. I don't see any disadvantage from the point of view of the peer review process or the chances of getting it published.
I think that it shouldn't be a problem, but I think it's wise probably to mention that in your cover letter that it's been disseminated or in what format, because it would pop up in those what's it called?
Authenticate.
Those tools to check for plagiarism and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And the other thing, I think this varies a bit across the different journals, but at least at Aegis, most papers would go through at least 3 rounds of revision. So the finally published version would look very different from the one you have in the repository anyway.
One of the things that you lose is the anonymity.
Yeah, so true.
Yes.
True.
But I suppose in a working paper, it's out there to get feedback from your colleagues, isn't it? In science, it's very much out when you put it into physics, it's out there, you're looking to get feedback before you submit the final paper. So I'd imagine it looked quite different. Because if you thought it was a working paper and you thought it was nearly there, maybe you're going straight to the journal rather than putting it into the working database.
So, Eva. Go ahead.
So yeah, I kind of wanted to follow up on Tom's point. The whole idea of putting something in a working paper series is probably because you want other people to read it and give you feedback and be able to access it. And ultimately, that feedback is going to be useful for you. So when you submit it to a journal, probably it'll be a modified version but like Par said, it's a good idea to say that it's in this working paper series. And, you know, honestly, a lot of times you can't hide your name. I mean, you may hide the fact that you refer to your own working papers, and it may look anonymous, but people kind of tend to know who, sort of where this paper is coming from. So that shouldn't really be an issue if someone is reviewing the paper in a very objective way. So it doesn't hurt to put it out there as long as it's not copyrighted or there's no restrictions. You're okay with submitting it to a journal.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. I don't know what the motivation might be to actually put it out there, other than the fact that you want to get some feedback early on. Another motivation would be you don't want to turn it into a paper because it's going to take a lot longer time to actually put together a compelling literature review, put it into a format that's amenable to a specific journal. So a lot of research centers do put out their research findings before they actually turn it into papers. But before they do it, they have the means to actually protect the intellectual property one way or another before putting it out there for public. A lot of the schools who does the working papers, they do it internally within the university, not necessarily open to the rest of the world until the paper is actually submitted to an outlet and got accepted. So it all depends upon what the motivation behind it is. It's not really commonly practiced process to put out the papers before it's complete and journal ready. Another motivation might be that, you know, because in the pipeline it might take a couple of years for the paper to show up. By that time, the interestingness of the study may not be as appealing as it was when you actually discovered it 2 years ahead of time. So you want the world to know about it. Is that right? So.
Can I raise a question? You know, I can try it without the microphone.
Okay.
Can you hear? Firstly, it's not a question, it's an introduction. My name is Richard Mapleston. I'm a member of the Society, and I'm currently chair of the awards panel for the Operational Research Society. So I think everybody, I know Sally is aware of it because she's been on the panel for quite a long time. But of course the final outcome of all this publication process is that the paper which is regarded in the minds of the awards panel gets an award. So I'm sure that's probably not the main motivation for submitting to your journals. And it's interesting to hear about the latest journal, because I'm sure once there's sufficient papers there, we'll come up with another award, and we'll need another panel membership to decide, in the views of the judges, which will be the best paper of the year in your journal. And different award panels involve editors in different ways to try and get their views into, you know, trying to get a balanced view of the paper. So firstly, it's nice to see all the members here. But I think one of the main criteria that we use in the views of the judges is the impact of the work. And I think OR has always been a practical topic. Its ultimate goal is to improve the well-being of the planet. And that relies on getting your research out into the hands and minds of the practitioners. And I think clearly the audience for JAWS is very clear of the OR community. I think less clear perhaps for Aegis. And I wonder who the practical audience is for the business analytics. But clearly there's a lot of people now, practitioners, who work in that area and not aware of your new journal, and probably aren't aware of Aegis. And you just mentioned this cycle time for research and getting it out into the world. It could take several years. Now, I was just wondering what your thoughts were in terms of how some of the newer journals can become part of that practitioner consciousness, so outside of the academic world, to improve the impact of your work. So maybe that's something you've got some thoughts of right at the genesis of a new journal. How do you actually make sure your journal has the maximum possible impact as a tool for practitioners out in
business analytics actually is a term generated by industry, kind of motivated the educational institutions to create the educational program and develop the research curriculum accordingly. So it is very practitioner-oriented field anyway. So it's not a single theoretical, narrowly defined field, but how can we put a lot of the enabler technologies from machine learning to statistics applied to real data, real problem, to produce real results that actually directly applicable to the real world application. So by definition, Journal of Business Analytics is about practitioners, the results of which. But then again, in a journal context, it has to follow certain guidelines of having the uniqueness, the novelty, the contribution, taking what's already built and kind of taking it one minor step forward in advancement. So from the journal perspective, I think what we can do is to expedite the review process as much as we possibly can so that the results can be out there in a digital form as soon as the paper is accepted to the practitioners to read and understand. But beyond that, it's purely connected to the practitioners. That's where the problem comes from. That's where the data comes from. So in business analytics data, you cannot simulate it. You cannot just come up with it. You cannot just collect it from students. It has to come from the real transactional database, either structured or unstructured, although we call it unstructured in terms of how computers see it. For us humans, it's still structured. It has grammar, all those textual data. So all those data has to come from the real sources for a specific problem, generating impactful results. So to me, Journal of Business Analytics is all about practitioners. It's all about the problems that comes from practice, data comes from practice, and solutions going back to the practice to make things better.
Yeah. Well, Per first, and then Sudha.
Right. I think this is something that we in Aegis we've been working with over the last few years. This year we appointed a new role called Senior Editor for Practice to work with this particular issue. And one thing that we're doing now is we're starting something we call Science to Practice. So it's actually a website up, but it's not really running yet. Science2practice.org. The idea is that we now have a process where this practice editor, if you like, checks every now and then what are the new papers that are sort of being accepted or in that stage of the process, and we then put them off and give them to more content editors that work specifically with writing up short practice-oriented versions of those papers and communicate through this Science to Practice website. So that's one way to reach out, and then of course it links back to the full paper if you need more of the details.
It's then how you get the awareness of those tools. I mean, I'd never heard of Google Scholar before, but so if you're an IT strategist, for example, how you actually would think of going to look for these things in the first place and getting and learning the benefits of the case studies in particular, which are in your journals. There's some really good work there.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples from our first issue to show how we're actually focusing on not esoteric problems that eggheads like us make up sitting in a room, but rather it's a real problem. So one of our papers in the first issue the authors address the problem of designing a bike share system so it connects with a public transportation system of some other kind, like whether it's taxis or buses. So they've actually worked with a very large company to extract data from their bike share program, combine the taxi sharing, the ride sharing data, and design this method that sort of shows in which areas the ride sharing works well and where they need the bike share system to work, so these systems can connect together to make it easy for people to get around within a particular city. And so in the paper they pointed out the implications for practice. So that is something that a practitioner would enjoy reading very much. Similarly, in the news today, these days we see a lot of information about fake news. So another paper has actually developed an algorithm to distinguish fake tweets from real tweets, and they've collected a data set from Twitter with about 1 billion tweets in it and developed a deep learning algorithm to sift out the fake tweets from real tweets, which would be very relevant for someone like Facebook today. So those are very good examples. So that's the kind of research we're targeting with the Journal of Business Analytics. It's a real problem with real data, real solution with an algorithm, and then the implications for practice. Now, can you, as a bike share company, take the results and directly use it? I would say probably you'll need to work with the researchers to put that into practice, but but there's a direct implications for practice. And I think PAR's, a statement about creating these blurbs about papers, that's something we have discussed as an OR society set of editors, is we want to be able to create these understandable short snippets, maybe video snippets, that talk about the implications of the paper and then disseminate widely so practitioners can actually get a sense for what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Right up at the back there.
We're obviously very fortunate in the OR Society in having this breadth of journals, and some of them are more established and some of them are just starting. Is there, and this question goes as well for Richard, is there any sort of strategy to help these new journals to go up the rankings? We as academics look a lot at the rankings, and I was thinking when you were talking earlier about people publishing in health system or journal simulation, some people might be guided more by the number attached to that journal rather than the area in which it will probably be the audience that they want to reach. So are we doing anything, or can we do anything to bring the rankings of all the journals up?
Well, certainly this is a very good question that we spent some time talking about yesterday afternoon in our meeting, but would you like to share some of the thoughts we had on that as an answer to the question? Sorry.
Well, I mean, I was part of the panel when we changed publishers, and that was one of the questions we asked them as to what their strategies were. And as an editor for health systems that doesn't yet have an impact factor, I've got a particularly personal interest in getting one, because it just excludes you from all sorts of things. So, I mean, I think it's an incredibly pertinent issue that's discussed at every single publications committee meeting. And we as editors are constantly hassling the publishers for more support, and but I mean, they are really aware of it. I mean, absolutely. I mean, being in a business school myself, I know the pressure to publish in certain journals that are in the ABS list, and if you publish in a 2-star journal, you're wasting your time. So, much as we loathe the way that system works, I think, we do accept that's the reality of the world we're in. So, I mean, certainly rest assured that it's very, very much in the forefront of all our minds.
Just as I think it's a real strength also to have this, the OR Society bring us editors together to discuss these things, because I mean we can share a lot of ideas, and I think that's really key, because although there is some overlap, I think there's not that much overlap that we're sort of competing with each other.
Okay, thank you. John, you had a question?
Yeah, it's a sort of fairly general question to everyone. Richard is aware of what I'm going to say. I should start by saying I was editor of Jaws for 4 or 5 years in the early 2000s, and until last year and for the previous 10 years I was chair of the OR Society's awards panel, and I chaired a subgroup looking at Jaws in particular, and there is a medal for the best paper in Jaws, the Goodeve medal. So for most of those years I've scanned all the papers in Jaws, and I've noted, and again it's probably not a novel thought, but papers seem to me now to be in a very narrow area and the people who are interested in that piece of research, there's probably not a lot of them, even globally. And often they use a language that's understandable, it might be a mathematical language, understandable to that tiny subgroup. And those are the ones from which the referees come and so on. And to my mind, it's likely that within some of these subgroups there are developments that are general developments which would apply in other fields, but people in other fields won't realise the importance of that particular development. So my suggestion, and see what you think, is two things, they're fairly modest, I have to say. First of all, editors should spend a lot of time looking at the titles of papers, because a slightly longer title can give a much better indicator of what's in the paper. And I have had a wonderful example of a 3-line title full of mathematics and optimization and so on, when the shortened title was optimizing power generation. And if that had been the title, people in that area would have been pointed to that paper. I mean, as it happens, that example is the wrong way round. It's a long article, sorry, a short title would be better than a long one, but usually a slightly longer title would be better than a short one. And my other suggestion is that as well as the abstracts which are currently in papers, which are aimed at the researchers in that narrow niche area, there should be a second abstract which is aimed at a wider audience and explains the potential of the research in this area in a wider area, and perhaps gives more context information about this particular problem. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you, John. Who would like to respond to the idea of having a second abstract, something on editors revising titles to make them more accessible to a wider audience?
I'll say something on titles. I think that came up at the meeting yesterday. Yes. So that was one thing, getting the title right and getting the abstract right, and reminding authors that this is what most people will actually read of their paper, and if they don't like it, they were not going to read anymore.
That's right. That's the first indication.
Yeah, that came up definitely yesterday, so we've got that one on the list. So that's an easy win.
I suggested that a year ago, so
yeah, it's filtered through. Yeah.
These things take time.
Yes.
I think in general, I think both points are good points, and you know, it's basically said we mentioned titles yesterday, and we've also been talking about having a version of a paper that might appeal to a different audience, so a kind of practitioner version of a short article which might appeal to practitioners. So yeah, I mean, I think they're good ideas and things that we're
as an aside on that,
aware of and consider.
There's an Impact magazine which sometimes takes these developments and puts them into a wider and more understandable context, and Sue Burchand and I produce impact papers for the I4's newsletter, and that's what we do. We take existing papers and we work with the author to bring out more about the process and the context of the work and less of the technical details.
Yeah. Well, that's right. I'm sure that Graham Rand would be interested in, as editor of the Impact magazine, in papers that have been published in academic journals, having a new treatment to come out and be presented to the wider public in the context of Impact magazine. Is that true? You would welcome that?
I would certainly welcome it. I look through journals and don't find many that I want to follow up. Okay. So that is not a natural way at the moment, but yes, I'm very happy to. I mean, for Impact, I tend to spot and solicit most articles, but so I might miss some.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, in healthcare and medical journals, it's not uncommon to have a really structured form of an abstract. And I don't know how people would feel about trying to introduce something where one of the criteria, the headings that you have to say is, implications for practice or something.
Okay.
Just to continue on that, my point is aimed as much at researchers in general as practitioners. Researchers are involved in a very narrow area, and there might be some things in other areas which are relevant to that.
Okay. Thank you, John. I think we've got time for one last question. Does anyone want to go with that? Right at the back here.
Hi, my name is Yingli. I'm from Cardiff University. I'm sorry, I came in halfway through, so if this question has been asked, so apologise. I myself is fairly new to the OR society, which I found it quite interesting because I came from an industrial background. I used to work for industry for a number of years. So the way I look at it tends to say, okay, physics are a real problem, etc. But you know, the institution where I'm from, some of the journals that we targeting are very theory driven. So I'm asking a question about you know, how, if for instance some of our OM journals are saying, if you haven't got a good theoretical contribution, no matter how the method you use, how innovative they are, or etc., then it is not going to be published. So what I'm asking, I suppose, is you know, the originality that comes from the innovation in methodology, innovative application of the methodology, or from the theory. So from different journals that we might have different kind of priority on that. So what I think we don't want to know, for instance, GORS and EG's perspectives. I know EG's is quite qualitative, lots of research. I think it's that's to publish quantitative stuff as well, but are you more emphasizing on theoretical contribution or the other way around with the our journal of our research society? Are you more looking for, you know, this tool, the right tool for solving problem? So I mean, this is a rather naive, probably rather naive perspective, but I'm fairly new, so I want to understand exactly when, as academic research, when we start to write for journals, we know what, you know, what you're looking for.
Okay, can you respond on theoretical contribution versus practical impact?
Yeah, well, it's actually I wrote an editorial for Aegis a couple of years ago talking about theoretical contribution, or rather the lack of theoretical contribution, and whether or not that should be a cause for rejection. And my thinking is that we tend, in general, in IS at least, tend to maybe overemphasize theoretical contribution to the extent that we downplay empirical contributions. So we don't write up the cases well enough because we spend too much time on trying to, you know, theorize. So my thinking is that if a journal has that, a paper has that many pages, you have to prioritize somehow. So if you want to write a good empirical story, you can't expect all that, you know, theoretical contribution. So no, we're trying to get away from that. But it's also difficult because it's in the mindset of reviewers and so on, that it should be a certain way. But we are working on that.
Does anyone want to add to that?
I mean, from the point of view of JAWS, I mean, what we're looking for is a contribution to theory and practice of OR. Now, the important thing is there's got to be a contribution, and so I think if you apply a known method to a known problem and don't say very much about the process and to what extent the results were implemented, to what extent the results made any difference in a practical sense, then there's not much contribution there, and so the referees are going to, you know, throw that out if it gets to the referees. So, you know, there's got to be a contribution, and whether it's mainly in a theoretical aspect or whether it's mainly the innovation is in the problem that's being addressed, or the contribution is because of the insights we're getting about the process of modelling and the process of applying and implementing solutions, it doesn't really matter. There's got to be a contribution, and it's for the author really to make that contribution clear and state it strongly, and that's what we want.
Okay, I think that's a very helpful answer. I'm afraid the clock has beaten us because we we should be finishing now at 2:30. However, this room I think is not being used, so I think some of the editors may be able to stay around for a little bit. So if you have another question that you haven't had a chance to ask, then grab one of them before they disappear and ask them individually. But as we finish, can we thank all the members of the panel for